All right, let's begin this lesson by re-executing our code to load our panel object into our P variable. And just as a quick review of a concept we introduced a few lessons ago, we know that to extract a specific data frame from a panel, we used a value from the items axis. So we began by pulling those values using the items attribute. There we have our 5 labels for our 5 data frames. And then we used the square bracket syntax and gave it one of those item axis values to pull in a data frame. So for example, I'm pulling in volume. There's our volume data frame where we have our major axis represented as the row labels and our minor axis represented here as the column labels. Now this is just one way actually that we can extract a data frame from our panel. There are other ways, including the methods that we're going to introduce in this lesson and in the next lesson. So this lesson is concerned with a method called major axis. Now it's a little bit confusing because we're going to have a major axis attribute and a major axis method, and both of them are spelled differently, which only makes it a little bit more confusing and prone to error. But let's review. So I'm going to collapse this. So we have a major axis attribute, and it's called by p.major_axis. Again, this is an attribute, so it does not require parentheses. And what this does is return to us the values that make up the row labels of our original data frames, which is a date time index of all of the dates within our 5 data frames. We can see that number represented right here, 1,688 dates. So what the major axis method does, it returns a data frame, but it bases it on a major axis key. Then what it's going to do in order to shift the kind of structure and the display around is that the minor axis of the panel will become the index of the new data frame, and the items axis of the panel will become the column headers. So in a way, we're sort of cutting out the major axis. A little bit confusing because we're calling a major axis method. Let's go ahead and just do it right here. p.major_axis or axis. It's going to be spelled differently from the attribute, which is the attribute is the full axis word spelled out. This major axis method is just major_xs. And what it basically does is allow us to provide a key, and that key has to be a valid value within our major axis. And what it's going to do is extract basically a new data frame based around that key and sort of cut out that value from relevance. So for example, if I just pick a random date, let's say I pick this one, 09/06/2016, September 6th, 2016. If I write this in here, what it's basically going to do is give me a data frame. You can see that our original items, which were the 5 items in the panel, are now the column headers, and our minor axis labels, which were our column labels in the original P data frame, or our P panel that stores those data frames, those two have basically been shifted. So we've basically cut out the major axis component because we specified that we want to use this value for it, and thus we can basically cut out that dimension and return the proper data frame as a result. So keep in mind that if the key that we provide does not exist within our major axis values, we're going to get an error. For example, Christmas Day 2013, like 12/25 does not exist, so it's not going to be able to find that value among our panel's major axis, and it's going to throw an error. However, if we do have a valid value such as the 20th of that year, again, it's going to look for that value within the major axis values. It's going to identify a match. Good. It's basically going to throw it out because it knows that that's the key that we want to focus on, and it's going to take those items axis and the minor axis from our panel and now combine them in a brand new data frame. Again, our 5 company names, which used to be the column headers in a regular extraction process from the panel, have now become the index labels, and our 5 items values in the original panel have now become the column headers. But the easiest way to remember this, because once we dive into the minor axis method in the next lesson, you'll be thinking, well, how do I remember what does what? Just remember that whenever you call major axis as a method, it's going to cut out the major axis. You provided a value from the major axis index, and it basically says this is what you're focusing on. I can totally disregard that entire axis, that entire dimension, and just focus on the other two. So when we provide a value for major axis, it's going to throw that out and focus on the minor axis and the items axis. Much like whenever we do our traditional syntax of brackets, we give it a value for items, so it can basically throw out this axis and focus entirely on the major and minor axis as the two areas of focus to be represented in a two-dimensional object like a data frame. So again, in the traditional bracket syntax, we're basically selecting this option to cut out by giving a valid value. So pandas is focused on these two. And now in this major axis method that we've introduced, we're introducing a value to the major axis. So pandas knows what to work with. So it's going to basically cut out this axis and focus on the other two, items and minor. And predictably in the upcoming lesson, which has the complementary minor axis method, we're going to provide a value to the minor axis so it can basically cut out that component and focus here on the first two. So I'll see you in the next lesson, sort of the next part of this two-part focus on the major axis and the minor axis methods.